She looked him in the eye, punched the launch override, and left him to die. That was 6 months back, when a consortium fleet lieutenant had jettisoned the last human escort in a low orbit over Little Ember and told her overseer that the freight moon was clean. He was only a cooper by then, a widower who bent hoops and coopered oak barrels for the ranchers out on the lava plain. Nothing on Little Ember wanted his barrels enough to steal them. Nothing on Little Ember wanted a man like him alive. That was the whole point of putting him there. But when 6 starving orcs crawled under his porch to die and woke to salt pork and sourdough on his cutting board, they woke a debt the whole galaxy would eventually pay. By nightfall, the road above his homestead ran red, and by dawn, one warrior would sit in the throne room of an iron matriarch with a cooper's axe across her knees, weeping in a tongue no human had ever heard, sobbed aloud. The air on Little Ember that morning tasted of wood smoke, iron ash, and the faint sulfur of the freight road warming under a low red sun. 6 hours before the killing began, Vrachtul Meshach opened her eyes under a stranger's porch and could not at first understand why she was still alive. Her true name was a sequence of clicks and glottal drops that the translator collar had long since flattened to Vrachtul Meshach, and her true name was a curse in 3 of the 4 Grokath dialects. She had gone to sleep expecting the cold to take her. The cold on Little Ember was patient. It came up the freight road at night, over the black stone, past the shuttered chapel, and it went to work on anything left out under the sky. She had chosen the porch because there was a break in the wind under it, and because a low porch on a low house was the kind of grave that shamed no one. Instead there was warmth, not the animal warmth of her pack, though her broken hand of 6 was piled around her like pups, chest plates dented, tusks yellow with hunger, one still curled around the shaft of a broken spear. This warmth came from above. A stovepipe hummed. A shadow moved across the frosted planks over her head. Boot soles, human boot soles, small and blunt, the sound consortium propaganda called the walking of a soft species. Then the porch door creaked open, and she looked up through the gap in the planking and saw him. He was a small man for his kind. He was not tall and he was not wide, and his shoulders under his shirt had the sag of a man who had been strong once and now saved his strength for one thing at a time. He wore a leather apron burned in 3 places. He had gray in a beard the color of old sawdust. He was carrying a splitting maul. Vrachtul Meshach had, in her 44 cycles of life, killed 23 sentients. She knew how to gauge one. This one, she thought, would be easy. One of her hands, even starved, could break the round bone of a human wrist. Even at 7-limbed weight, she could put a tusk under his jaw and lift. He looked down through the boards. He looked her in the eye. He did not startle. He did not lift the maul. He said, "You got room down there for 6 more minutes of sleep. I have to fetch water." She did not understand the words. The collar rendered them for her a breath later, and by then he had already set the maul against the porch post, stepped down the 2 stairs, and gone around the house toward a hand pump under an oak. She watched him go. She lay in the warm cavity under his porch, surrounded by her half-dead pack, and could not, for the space of 100 heartbeats, remember how to be angry. When he came back, he was carrying 2 buckets of water. He set them at the foot of the stairs. He said, "There's a trough out back for washing. There is bread in the house. There is salt pork in the smoke box. If you can walk in on your own 2 feet, you are welcome to it. If you cannot walk, one of you sends a runner, and I will bring it out. Do not come at me from behind. I do not like being come at from behind." Then he went inside. The door did not lock behind him. Krefta, her youngest, pushed his face up against her jaw and whispered in the shame tongue, "It is a trap, blood of broods. Humans do not feed Grokath. Humans do not feed anything." She listened. She heard, inside the house, the sound of a stove being fed a log. She heard water being poured into a kettle. She heard, from a shelf, the clink of a tin cup against another tin cup. She heard the small, tuneless whistle a human made when it was thinking about nothing in particular. She said, "It is a trap." and I have been in 100 traps, and none of them smelled like bread." She dragged herself out from under the porch. Her chest plate scraped a nail. She had lost weight enough that she noticed the pull of a nail on her armor. She stood up in the cold red morning of Little Ember, 7 feet of Grokath warrior on legs that had marched 11 days on melt ice and the bark of a resinous tree, and she looked at the small house and the small barn and the small hand pump and the small stack of coopered barrels curing under an awning, and she thought, for the first time in a year, that perhaps the Iron Broods had been wrong about the humans. That was, she would tell it later, the first mistake of the day. Ross Tandy fed 6 orcs at his kitchen table because he had been raised in a cabin outside a cold city by a mother who said no honest hunger left her house. He fed them in the order of least strength. That was the way she had taught him, and it was the way of the Grokath, which he did not know until later. He brought the youngest krefta, a bowl of the barley soup he had made the night before, and he set it down carefully so the wooden spoon did not clack against the rim. He brought the next smallest a cut of the smoked pork he had been curing in the shed. He set out the last quarter of his sourdough, and he set out a jar of the black currant preserves the ranchers on the lava plain traded him for barrels. He put out mugs of coffee for all 6 of them, because he had 6 mugs and no other kind of vessel a warrior would drink from at a human table. They ate the way men in trench camps ate. They did not speak. They did not thank him. They ate the food that was put in front of them, and when the food was gone, one of them, a broad-jawed Grokath with the tribe mark of the Broods burned into her cheek plate, put down her spoon and said in a voice like gravel under a boot, "Cooper, yes, why?" Ross took his own coffee and sat down at the head of the table because that was where the last living human on Little Ember sat when guests were in his house. He said, "Because you are hungry. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." She looked at him a long time. The other 5 did not look up from their empty bowls. Vraktul Meshach said, in the flat, scraped voice of the translator caller, "You know what we are. I know some. You know what the bounty is. I have heard. 9,000 credits each, 6 of us." She counted on her 7-jointed fingers. 54,000 credits. That is a large amount of money for a cooper. "That is a large amount of money for anyone," he said. "Yet you fed us." "Yet I fed you." She waited. He drank his coffee. Krefta, the youngest, still shaking, put his forehead down on the wood of the kitchen table because his body had never in his life been so warm all the way through, and he did not know what to do about it. Vraktul Meshach said at last, "Cooper, we do not know how to accept this. You do not have to. The Broods pay their debts. Then when you have your feet under you, split my wood. It is stacked in rounds behind the barn. My son used to do it. My son is not here." He did not tell them then about his son. He did not tell them the story that had put a gray in his beard, the color of old sawdust. He got up from the table and he took the empty bowls to the sink and he washed them with the same tuneless whistle he had used at the stove. And he did not turn his back on them because he was a fool, but because his mother had taught him that turning your back on a guest was how you told the guest you meant them no harm. That was the second mistake, and it was also the second thing about the day that could not be counted a mistake at all. The Grokath went out to the woodpile. They split wood as the sun came up over the black lava plain of Little Ember. They split it in the honor cut of the Iron Broods, which was to say each round was struck once along the grain and split clean into a wedge no wider at the top than the width of a warrior's palm, so that any log so split would burn evenly on the coldest night of the coldest season, and any pack that split its wood in this fashion could be recognized by any other Grokath who came upon the pile in later years. They split for 4 hours without speaking. They stacked the wedges 4 wide against the long wall of Ross Tandy's barn. They stacked them the way you stack against a wall that must hold a shape, foundations first, and hearts overlapped, and outer skin combed smooth. When they were done, the woodpile stood man-high the whole length of the barn, and it was a wall of a barn now, and not a barn with wood beside it. Vrachtul Meshach came to the porch with sawdust in the joints of her chest plate and said, "It is done." Rostandi was drinking his second cup of coffee. He looked up the freight road. He said, "Yes, and now you should go." She followed his eye. Coming up the switchback below the homestead, still 4 kilometers off, but climbing, was a consortium skimmer. It was long and low and painted the pale bone color the Ophidian favored on hunt runs. It rode a hand's breadth above the road on a hover cushion that puckered the dust. Behind the skimmer, moving at the tireless pace of trained snake troopers on the ground, came a platoon in the segmented armor of the consortium's outer garrisons, 12 at least. Their shield emitters were bright pinpricks along their shoulder yokes. Their lances were low and sheathed. Vrachtul Meshach made a sound in her throat that the collar did not translate. Her sisters at the woodpile all straightened up at once, the way a herd raises its heads. Krifta, the youngest, sat down abruptly on a round of oak. 54,000 credits, Vrachtul Meshach said. "Cooper, you have 4 minutes and a small boy could throw us. You have 30 seconds and a man with a plasma carbine could hold us." "I know. You will do neither." "No. Why?" He did not answer that either. He set down his coffee cup on the porch rail very gently because his wife had made that cup on a wheel in a town he did not go back to. He went inside. He was inside a long time. Vrachtul Meshach stood in the yard with the skimmer growing in the middle distance and the wall of the woodpile at her back, and she counted a Grokat's count on her 7-jointed fingers, and she got to 9 before he came out again. He was not wearing the leather apron. He was wearing a shirt that had once been a uniform shirt and had been washed enough times to lose most of the colors it had ever been. He was carrying in his right hand the cooper's adze, in his left hand the hoop driver, and across his back on a leather strap the short-hafted felling axe with the iron head the color of a rained-on knife. The axe was not a cooper's axe. It had a haft cut too short for felling anything a lumberjack would call a tree. It had 2 lugs at the head like a boarding axe. It was, she saw at once with a soldier's eye, a weapon. She said, "That is not a cooper's axe." "No. Where did you get that?" "From a place I do not talk about." He took the 2 steps down off the porch, and she saw, for the first time, the way he set his feet. His shoulders were not sagging anymore. His weight was not on his heels. Something in the man had changed the way weather changes over an ocean, and when he had walked past her, he was not a cooper. Krefta, the youngest, whispered, "Blood of broods, what is he?" She said, "I do not know yet." The skimmer came up the last of the switchback and pulled onto the flat of the yard. The forward hatch popped, and the overseer stepped down. He was Ophidian. 4 meters of segmented python work in a cloak of the consortium's iridescent black, and his hood frill was up in what his kind used for a smile of business. He carried a slate. He was flanked by his 2 lieutenants, snake troopers of what the consortium called the enforcement cohort, plasma sidearms out and lowered, shield emitters at half power along their shoulder yokes. Behind them, 12 more troopers came up the road and formed a loose crescent in the yard. The overseer said, in the trade tongue that everyone on Little Ember spoke, "Sept Limpak, you are the property of the Ophidian Consortium under lien number 499/M. You will surrender to bond transport. Cooper, you will step aside. There is a bounty on the Sept Limbs. There is not yet one on you." Rostandi said, "Overseer, take your platoon back to the skimmer, get in the skimmer, go back down the road." The overseer's hood frill went very still. "Cooper, overseer, I do not think you understand what you are choosing." "I understand fine. There are 12 enforcers behind me. I can count. They are shielded, so they are. Cooper, look at me. Look at my platoon. Look at the yard. Look at the road. Do the number in your head." Rostandi did all of those things in that order, and then he did one thing more. He took a small step to his left until his back was against the woodpile the Grokath had built along the barn. He put the cooper's adze into his left hand and the hoop driver into his belt, and he drew the short-hafted felling axe off the strap on his back and held it low at his right hip in the loose grip of a man who had held such things for a long time. He said, "Overseer, last chance. You go down the road, or I put you in the ground beside it." The overseer laughed. It was the first laugh the Grokath had heard in a year. It was not a good laugh. It ended in a hiss. "Cooper," he said, "you are one man?" Rostandi said, "Yes." Silence. The whole yard on Little Ember in that instant went quiet in the particular way silence goes quiet when a predator moves and the smaller things in the underbrush altogether stop breathing. The skimmer's hover cushion hummed. A wind up the freight road stirred the sawdust in the joints of Vrachtul Meshek's chest plate. Somewhere back of the barn, a raven called once and then thought better of it. The overseer's hood frill closed halfway, because even an Ophidian's brainstem knows when it has miscounted. Rostandi said, "Vrachtul Meshek, behind the woodpile. Take your pack down." He said it in the trade tongue, and the caller rendered it into her ear with a beat of astonishment, because he had said her name without the honorifics and without hesitation, as if he had heard it once and said it in his head and never lost it. She said, "Cooper, behind the pile," he said. "You will not want to see this from the front." She put a hand on Krevta's shoulder and pushed him down behind the wall of split oak. The other four went with him without a word, because in the last 5 seconds the man they thought was a cooper had shifted into a shape the Grokath had a word for, and the word was one they used only in the mouth of the great tellers around a very late fire. Rostandi stepped into the middle of his yard. Then the platoon moved, and the yard became something else. The first lieutenant raised his plasma sidearm. He fired from the hip, the way an enforcer fires when he is bored and the target is one soft man. The bolt was blue-white, and it left a shrieking line in the cold air. It struck Rostandi square in the sternum. He rocked back on his heel. He did not fall. The bolt spent itself against the shirt over his ribs, and the shirt smoked, and the flesh under the shirt went black in a coin-sized burn. And Rostandi took one breath in through his nose and one breath out, and stepped forward 2 paces and buried the head of the short-hafted felling axe in the plasma emitter of the first lieutenant's shoulder yoke. The emitter went dead. The lieutenant's personal shield collapsed with a sound like a bottle uncorking underwater. Rostandi pulled the axe out along the honor cut, kept the motion going, brought the head down into the joint at the base of the lieutenant's throat where the segmented armor overlapped, and the lieutenant folded down into the dust of the yard without ever having pulled the trigger a second time. The second lieutenant was already firing. 2 bolts, then 3. All 3 struck. Rostandi took the first 2 on the same shirt, over the same ribs, and did not stop. The third bolt went through his left thigh and out the back, and a fist of red mist stood a moment in the cold air and drifted, and the leg buckled under him, and he came down on the knee. He did not put out his hand to catch himself. He did not drop the axe. He drove the head of the cooper's adze up under the second lieutenant's chin from the ground, and the second lieutenant's shield had never in its calibration seen a piece of forged carbon steel moving at the speed of a human forearm from below, and it did not know what to do about it. The adze went through the underside of the jaw and into the roof of the skull, and the second lieutenant sat down in the dust with the surprised gentleness of a man being told bad news. Silence again over the yard. The overseer took 1 step back, only 1. His hood frill spread wide. He said something into the slate that the caller did not translate because it was a consortium panic key. Rostandi got up off the knee. He put weight on the shot leg. He put weight on it the way a man puts weight on a bad tooth to see how bad it is. He decided the leg would carry him. He rolled his shoulder, and the burn under the shirt cracked open across the ribs, and he did not notice. He said, in a voice that was almost gentle, 10 more. The 10 remaining troopers of the Crescent at last understood. They fired all together. Vrach Talmashuk, watching from behind the woodpile with the sawdust of the Grokath honor cut in her armor joints, would tell it later at 4 different fires and never twice quite the same. And every time she told it, she began with the same 3 sentences. She said, "The plasma went into him and stayed in him. The shields on our enemies were as glass to a wedge of iron. And the human, whose name I had heard for the first time that morning, did not once make a sound like a man in pain. He walked through the crescent the way a woodsman walks a tree line he knows. He kept the woodpile at his back for the first 4 seconds so no bolt could take him from behind. Then, when the 2 nearest troopers rushed to flank him, he stepped forward into the yard on the shot leg and did not favor it. And he took the near trooper's lance across the ribs and let it burn him a stripe from armpit to hip while he was breaking the trooper's shield emitter across the trooper's own helmet with the flat of the felling axe. And when the shield went, the axe came back around underhand and took the trooper in the softness between the segments of the neck armor, and there was 1 less snake trooper on the yard. He did not in any of this run. He did not in any of this dodge. He walked. He walked the way a man walks in a hard place. He walked the way the 11 generations of infantry on the ice moon of Kelvin's world had been bred to walk, at a gravity of 1.4, over ridges of black rock where dodging was not a thing a body did because dodging cost more oxygen than taking the hit. The 3rd trooper he took with the hoop driver, which was a length of iron in a wooden haft meant for setting a barrel hoop true, and it went through a shield calibrated for las lance and plasma and did not slow at all. The 4th trooper he took with the felling axe on the backswing. The 5th trooper had time to think and thought about running, and Ross Tandy caught him at the edge of the yard with the adze thrown underhand from 12 paces, and the adze went in between the shoulder yoke and the neck guard, and the trooper's shield sang a single note like a struck glass and died. 6 down. 6 to go. Ross Tandy stopped in the middle of the yard. He was bleeding from the thigh and from the side and from a place on his scalp where a monofilament round had come off a snake trooper's launcher and grazed him at the hairline. He was breathing hard. He was not breathing panic. He was breathing the long, slow, measured breath of a man in the middle of an afternoon of work. He said, in the trade tongue, "The rest of you, down the road, now." 3 of the 6 put down their weapons. 3 did not. The 3 who did not fired altogether, from 3 points of the compass. Ross Tandy went sideways in a way an outer worlder would not have believed a human body could go sideways. He put the woodpile between himself and one of them. He put a broken skimmer strut between himself and another. The 3rd he ran at. The 3rd had time to fire twice more. The 2nd bolt grazed the axe head and skipped off the iron, and the 3rd bolt went into the meat of Ross Tandy's right shoulder and out again through the collarbone. And Ross Tandy took the trooper in the sternum with the short-hafted axe 2-handed, and the shield died, and the trooper died a breath after it. The 3 who had put down their weapons dropped to the dust of the yard and lay very still with their hands spread and their hoods flat against the ground. Ross Tandy walked to the overseer. The overseer was by then standing very still by his own skimmer with the slate still in his hand, and his hood frill collapsed into the shape a consortium overseer's hood took when it did not want to be seen. He held up the slate. He said, in the smoothed trade tongue that his handlers had trained him to use with human clientele, "Cooper, there is a misunderstanding. I have authority to negotiate. The lien is contestable. I can double the bounty and pay it to you." Ross Tandy said, "Overseer." "Yes, kneel." The overseer knelt. He knelt in 3 joints because he had that many. He held up his slate. He said, "There are protocols. There are witnesses. This will go to the consortium magisters. This will go to the human embassy on Halden." "There is no human embassy on Halden. There is a human liaison. There is a human liaison who is on your payroll." The overseer went silent, because that was true, and because the human standing over him in the dust of his own yard had said it the way a man reads a line off a page. Ross Tandy said, "Overseer, there is a bounty on the sept limbs. There is a lien number. Who paid the lien?" "That is confidential, Overseer, that is confidential." Rostandi put the head of the felling axe under the Overseer's throat plate and lifted it very slightly, until the point of the axe found the soft place between the second and third plates where the Ophidian breath slits pulsed in and out with the fear breath. He said, "Overseer." The Overseer said a name, Vrachtul Meshech, behind the woodpile, made a sound in her throat that the caller could not shape into a word because the sound was older than words. Her 4 sisters and Krefta, the youngest, all made it with her, a long, low-breathing note like wind in a canyon at dusk, and it went on for the length of time a Grokath needs to understand that a thing believed for a year is at last confirmed. The name the Overseer had said was Grekrashlu, Matriarch Grekashlu of the Iron Broods, who had sold Vrachtul Meshech's pack to the Ophidian Consortium for a mining lease and who sat in the throne room of the black glass ziggurat of Vorgrokath 112 light years from Little Ember with the tally sticks of Vrachtul Meshech's sisters carved along the arm of her chair. Rostandi heard the sound the Grokath made. He turned his head just enough. He looked at Vrachtul Meshech across the yard. He said, "You knew." She said, "I suspected. You did not know for certain." "No, now you do. Now I do." He looked back down at the Overseer. He said, "Overseer, who was your paymaster on this contract? Not the buyer, the runner, the one who cut the ticket." The Overseer said, "I do not know his name. You know his name. I do not know his face. You know his face." The Overseer named a third party. The name was human. The name had 2 syllables. The name was the name of a man Rostandi had once known in a small city on a colder world. Rostandi stood very still. The Overseer, sensing that he had at last purchased his life, drew in a long breath through the breathing slits and said, in the smoothed voice of a man trying to seat a bargain, "You see, Cooper, the Consortium is a machine of many hands. I was only one hand of many. This name I have given you, this human name, perhaps I have earned some small consideration. Perhaps a walk to my skimmer, and I go back down the road, and this yard is your yard, and the sept limbs are your sept limbs, and no report ever goes upstream. There are more platoons behind me, Cooper. There will always be more platoons, but if the report does not go, they do not know where to look. Do we have terms?" Rostandi looked at him a long moment. He looked at the yard, at the 8 dead troopers, at the 3 living ones face down in the dust. He looked at his wounded thigh, and the black crusted place across his ribs, and the wet red seep along his collarbone. He said, "Overseer, I want to ask you a number. A number, 32. The Overseer's hood frill flickered. Rostandi said, "Say the number back to me, 32. And I want to ask you a second number. A second number, 35. The Overseer's hood frill collapsed. "Say the second number back to me, 35. Silence again over the yard. Even the wind held. Rostandi said, "There were 35 names on a list, Overseer, 10 years ago. On a hard piece of dirt called Ashfall, on a moon called Kelvin's World. The list belonged to me and to a company called Third Ridge. There was a paymaster who sold Third Ridge to the Consortium for the coordinates of a boron seam. 32 of the 35 names on the list have been taken care of, Overseer, one at a time, over 10 years, quietly, because a Cooper on a nothing moon has a long attention span. There are 3 names left. The name you just gave me is one of the 3. The paymaster is the second." He knelt down carefully on his one good knee to bring his face close to the Overseer's face. He said, "Overseer, what is the third?" The Overseer's hood frill opened all the way. He said, in a voice that was very small for a python of his size, "I am the third." "Yes, Cooper, please, Overseer. I have children. So did they. He did not swing the axe. He did not need to." He set the point of the axe under the Overseer's throat plate one more time, and he pushed once the way a man pushes a splitting wedge into the last inch of a hard round of oak, and the Overseer sat back on his 3 joints and was still. Rostandi stood up. He looked at the sky over Little Ember. It was a low gray sky the color of a rained-on knife. He looked at the freight road going down the switchback into the plain of black stone. He looked at the wall of split oak against the long side of his barn, and at the 6 Groketh standing behind it with their tusks, yellow with hunger and sawdust in the joints of their armor, and at the youngest of them, Krefta, who was crying without knowing it in the fashion of the very young of any sentient species. He said, "Vrachtul Meshek, come out." She came out. He said, "I do not know if what I have to do next is a thing I can do without help. I do not know if it is a thing I have any right to ask help for. I have 3 more names on a list. 2 of them are on this world in the port of Hollowreach, and I will take them today. The 3rd is on your world, in the throne room of your matriarch, and I would like your help getting there." Vrachtul Meshek said, "Cooper, yes, ask, I am asking." She knelt down in the dust of the yard, the way a Groketh knelt only twice in a lifetime, once to be named at birth and once to swear a blood debt. She put both her forehead tusks against the ground. She said, in the old shape of the Groketh tongue, that the collar had to work to render because it was a shape used only in the naming and the swearing, Corporal Ross Tandy of 3rd Ridge Company, veteran of Ashfall on Kelvin's World, of the 3rd Human Homeworlds. I am Vrachtul Meshek of the Iron Broods, exile of the Groketh. I owe you 6 lives and a woodpile. I will take you to Vorgroketh. I will put you in the throne room of Grekrashlu. I will stand between the axe of any Groketh in the ziggurat and the back of your neck for as long as we both draw breath. On the tally sticks of my sisters, on the salt of my mother, this is the shape of the debt." Ross Tandy looked down at her a long time. He said very quietly, "How did you know my rank?" She said, "The dossier." "What dossier?" "The one I read 3 years ago in a briefing chamber on Vorgroketh when the consortium first sold the Iron Broods the tactical files of the Ashfall veterans. There were 40 of you left alive in the whole galaxy. 3rd Ridge Company. The paper on your file said that whatever the consortium paid to know where you were living, the Iron Broods were to pay double if any of you crossed our territory. That was the paper I read. I have not forgotten a line of it. And you thought I was a Cooper, I hoped." He laughed then. It was the first time he had laughed in the yard, and it was a short, dry laugh with no cruelty in it. He said, "I hoped too." Then he took the axe off his belt, and he walked over to the woodpile, and he sat down on a round of oak, and he took a threaded quarter pen out of his shirt pocket, and he opened it, and he set to closing the hole through his own thigh, right there in front of 6 starving orcs. And Vrachtul Meshek, who had killed 23 sentients and seen more surgeries than she cared to remember, had to turn her head away. He said, without looking up, "Do not be delicate, fill the hole." She stayed. She did not fill the hole. She stood watch instead. And the 2 smallest of her pack came and held his shoulder still, and it was Krefta, the youngest, who at last stopped crying and picked up the quarter pen when Ross Tandy's hand shook too much and finished the last centimeter of the seam himself, tongue between his lower tusks, focused the way a Groketh is focused only twice in a lifetime. When it was done, Ross Tandy said, "There, now we go inside. We eat, we drink, we do not talk about the yard. And then we go into Hollowreach and we buy passage on a Groketh courier, because there is no one in this arm of the sky I trust to take me to Vorgroketh but a Groketh." He got up off the round of oak. He looked at the yard once more. He said, "Someone bring in the overseer's slate. There will be names on it. I want to see them before dark." They went inside. The cabin outside the small cold city on Kelvin's World was not a cabin any of them had ever seen. But over the next hours, as Ross Tandy fed them a second time and told the beginning of a story he had not told to a living soul in 9 years, they saw it. They saw the cabin. They saw the wood stove and the black kettle. They saw the sister, Nell, with a girl child of 6 on her hip and the coopering apron of her brother hung over a peg by the door. They saw the ice plane outside the window and the way the low blue star set on the horizon for 8 months of the year and did not rise. They saw the 11 generations of the human infantry of the third homeworlds, bred short and dense and patient, on a world where a man's lungs learned to pull oxygen out of thin, cold air, and a man's bones learned to carry 140% of a man's weight, and a man's mind learned to plant its feet and not move. He told them, over the second pot of coffee, about the ridges above Ashfall. He told them about the 12 days of the Black Frost. He told them about the Boron seam under the Third Ridge, and how Third Ridge Company was named after the ridge because Third Ridge Company was the company that walked up that ridge in 11.4 hours of upslope march in 1.4 gravity, in armor built for a world half the mass of Little Ember, and did not stop when the lenses came, and did not stop when the plasma came, and did not stop when a consortium orbital dropped a shot of monofilament rain that took away 4 of the company in a single breath. Third Ridge Company had 132 names on the muster at the top of the ridge. 35 names came down the ridge alive. The others were in the Black Frost, where the Boron seam met the daylight, and if you went there today, Ross Tandy said, you would not find bones, because the Black Frost took bones. You would find only the burn shadows of 132 men and women, shaped exactly where they had died standing up. They did not fall, he said. That is the thing that people out here do not understand about my company. We do not fall. We die standing up because that is what we were bred for. We do not do it because we are brave. We do it because the ridges of my homeworld will not permit falling. If you fall in Ashfall, you slide, and if you slide, you are gone. So we die on our feet. Vraktul Meshek said, and 35 walked down. 35 walked down. And the paymaster sold Third Ridge for the coordinates of the seam. Yes. And you have been walking up that paymaster's road for 10 years. Yes. And 32 names have gone into the ground. Yes. And there are 3 left. There are 3 left. 2 of them are in Hollow Reach. The third is in your matriarch's ziggurat. I am not going to say his name yet. I would like to sleep in my own bed one more night before I say it. He set down the cup. He looked at Krefta, the youngest, who had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with his head on his folded arms and his tusks resting on the wood. He said, you should have left me under the porch. Vraktul Meshek said, that is not a thing I will ever again believe. They left the homestead at dark. The overseer's slate had indeed named names. It had also named the man in Hollow Reach who cut the tickets for the consortium's bounty runs, and it had named the man in Hollow Reach who ran the Human Liaison's office, and it had named, buried at the bottom of a subfolder in a payment ledger the overseer had thought would never be opened, a 2-syllable human name that Ross Tandy had known for 10 years by a different face and had once called a friend. Ross Tandy put the slate in his shirt pocket. He locked the door of the homestead, at last, because he did not know when he was coming back. He looked once at the porch, at the place where 6 starving orcs had slept, and at the barn with its long wall of split oak curing in the cold. He said, it looks like a barn now. Vraktul Meshek said, it looks like a Grokath house. That is a compliment. That is a fact. He got into the passenger seat of the overseer's own skimmer, which Krefta the youngest had figured out how to fly in the space of a half hour. Because Krefta was a mechanical genius, the iron broods had not properly used, and they went down the switchback into the black stone plain of Little Ember, past the shuttered chapel at the crossing, past the rancher's lantern lights along the freight road, and up the coast to the port of Hollow Reach. Hollow Reach was a consortium town, but it was also a human town, because the consortium had brought the humans in to work the docks and the smelters and the freight rigs and had never gotten around to running them off again. It had a spaceport, it had a bar with 3 human songs on its player. It had a consortium tax office with a plasma-plated door. Ross Tandy went to the tax office at midnight. He knocked on the plasma-plated door. He waited until the man inside had spoken twice through the intercom before he broke the door off its hinges with the felling axe. Then he did what he had come to do. Vraktul Meshek stood at the top of the tax office stairs and let no one come up. When he came back down, he said, 1. Then he went across the street to the Human Liaison's office, which was above the bar with the 3 human songs. And he did what he had come to do there, and he came back down. He said, 2. 2 of the 3 names left on the list. That left 1. Grikrashlu. Krefta had, by that point, hot-wired a Grokath courier off the port apron. Because Krefta was a mechanical genius the Iron Broods had not properly used, and had further, in the space of an evening, become fond of the Cooper. The pack piled in. Rostandi took the co-pilot chair. Vrachtul Meshek took the pilot's. The courier lifted off from Hollow Reach at 3 in the morning and skipped translation at the edge of the system and was by breakfast 112 light-years away in the great dark ring of stars the Grokath called the Iron Belt. The ziggurat of Vorgrokath sat on a mesa of black glass 1,000 kilometers wide, on the 3rd moon of a red giant the Grokath had named after their first mother. The ziggurat was 14 levels high. Each level was faced in obsidian mined from the mesa itself. Each level, at each of its 4 corners, carried a fire basin that had not gone out in 9 centuries. The throne room was at the top of the ziggurat, open to the sky, and the throne was a slab of the same black glass with the tally sticks of a matriarch's fallen sisters carved along the arms. Vrachtul Meshek set the courier down in the courier berth halfway up the ziggurat. At a dock her authorization codes still opened because Grikrashlu had never bothered to revoke them, thinking Vrachtul dead in a slavehold. They walked up the last 7 levels on foot, past guards who saluted Vrachtul Meshek on reflex and then looked twice, and then, in a great growing whisper up the corridors of the ziggurat, began to call out her name in the shape of a rumor. Blood of Broods walks in the ziggurat. By the time they reached the throne room, half the ziggurat was behind them. Half the ziggurat was Vrachtul Meshek's clan, the disgraced of the Iron Broods and their kin, and the lowholders who had never accepted the mining lease. Half the ziggurat was Grikrashlu's, the highholders and their retainers, and their bought spearmen, and their Ophidian advisors, and one small and very quiet human in a consortium-cut suit with 2 syllables of a common name and a face Rostandi had once, in a colder city, called Friend. Rostandi saw the human as they came into the throne room. He did not go for him first. He went first to the foot of the throne. Grikrashlu was on the throne. She was old and enormous, and her tusks were capped in gold, and her armor was inlaid with the shell of a species that no longer existed because the Grokath had made a treaty with them and then broken it. She rose from the throne when Vrachtul Meshek came through the arch, and she rose in the slow, careful way of a matriarch who has been surprised in a very bad manner and is trying not to let the ziggurat see it. She said, in a voice that carried the length of the room, Vrachtul Meshek, my kin, my sister-daughter, you are alive. My heart is a fire of joy. Vrachtul Meshek said, Matriarch, there is a human at the foot of your throne. Grikrashlu looked down at Rostandi for the first time. She said, there is. He has a list, so I see. His list has 3 names. 2 have been paid. The 3rd is a human named Kasfarlin, standing to your left, who is on your rolls as a consortium liaison, but is on consortium rolls as a human trafficker of humans, and who is on my Cooper's list as the paymaster of a company called Third Ridge on a moon called Kelvin's World. Grikrashlu did not look at Kasfarlin. She looked at Rostandi. She said, Cooper, you have brought this trouble into my ziggurat. Yes. On my kin's back. Yes. Then say your business. Rostandi said, Matriarch, I have not come to your throne with a 4th name. He said it clearly, so the whole throne room would hear it. He said, I have come with 3, the name of the paymaster who sold my company, the name of the overseer who worked his contract, the name of the buyer who paid the paymaster to make the sale in the first place. 2 are dead. The 3rd is standing to your left. His name is Kasfarlin. He is standing to your left because he is your consortium contact and has been for 6 years, and he sold my company on the same day he sold your daughter's pack to the consortium mining office. Because he is the middleman of a middleman kind, and the Iron Broods have been buying his contracts as long as my people have been dying under them. Grikreshlu did not answer. Casfarlin took a step back. Vrachtul Meshek said, in the shape of the Grokath tongue used only in the naming and the swearing, matriarch. Grikreshlu said, sister-daughter. You knew. I did not know all of it. You knew enough of it. I did. Silence again in the throne room of Vorgrokath. Even the fire basins in the 4 corners of the level below seemed to fall to a lower burn. Rostandi said, matriarch, I am not here for you. The matriarch's tusks went very still. He said, I am here for the human at your left elbow. I do not have a quarrel with the Iron Broods. I do not have a quarrel with your throne. I have a quarrel with a paymaster, and I have a quarrel with an overseer, and I have a quarrel with a middleman, and the paymaster is in a tax office in Hollowreach, and the overseer is in a yard on Little Ember, and the middleman is at your left elbow. Give him to me, and I will walk out of this ziggurat and never come back, and your daughter of blood will decide for herself if she wishes to walk out with me or to take back the tally sticks that are carved into your throne. Grikreshlu looked at him a long moment. She looked at her sister-daughter. She said, and if I refuse? Rostandi said, then I will kill Casfarlin at your left elbow, and I will walk out of this ziggurat, and the Iron Broods will have to decide who they are with, blood of Broods or a dead middleman on the floor of the throne room. Grikreshlu breathed. It was a long, slow Grokath breath, and it took a long time. Casfarlin, at the last of it, made the mistake he had been about to make since he had first seen Rostandi come through the arch. He reached inside his consortium-cut coat for a plasma sidearm. He did not clear it. Rostandi had been carrying the felling axe low at his hip since the arch. The felling axe left his hip in the same motion it had been leaving hips for 200 years in the human infantry of Kelvin's world, which was the motion of a man clearing a splitting wedge from the round of oak he had just finished with. It went across the throne room in a line the eye could not follow, and it went into the side of Casfarlin's neck below the jaw, and it came out through the collarbone on the other side, and Casfarlin's plasma sidearm hit the black glass floor of the throne room with the small, sad sound of a piece of trade hardware falling on stone. Casfarlin fell. Casfarlin did not fall standing up. He fell the way a man on a soft world falls, sideways and slack, and he was dead before his shoulder touched the black glass. Silence, again, in the throne room. Rostandi stepped forward and pulled the axe out of Casfarlin's neck. He wiped the axe on Casfarlin's consortium-cut coat. He put the axe back on the strap on his back. He turned to Grikreshlu. He said, Matriarch, 3. Grikreshlu did not speak. Vrachtul Meshek said, Sister, Mother, what will you do? Grikreshlu said, I will let him leave. I will not send a spear after him. I will not send a courier. I will pay my daughter of blood the tally sticks she has come to collect. I will sit in my throne, and I will think, tonight, about which of my choices in the last 6 years brought a human cooper into my throne room with a woodsman's axe and a list of 3 names. I will think about it a long time. Longer than I will sit on this throne, I think. She looked down at Vrachtul Meshek. She said, Blood of Broods, will you come home? Vrachtul Meshek said, Not tonight, matriarch. Tonight I walk the cooper down to his courier. Tonight I take him back to his homestead. Tonight I sit on his porch under a woodpile of the Grokath honor cut, and I drink a bad coffee, and I think about the debt that is between us. Tomorrow we will see. Grikreshlu said, Tomorrow then. Vrachtul Meshek said, Tomorrow. And that was how the throne room of the ziggurat of Vorgrokath emptied out, on a red night on the 3rd moon of a red giant, with a matriarch on a throne and a dead middleman on the black glass, and a human cooper walking down through 14 levels of the tallest structure his species had ever set foot in. and the whole ziggurat, from the great arch down to the courier berth, standing to either side of the corridors in the silent Grokath salute of a species that had at last, in the space of one very long day, been made to understand what a human of the third homeworlds was. Krefta, the youngest, at the courier berth, said, "Cooper, where do we take you?" Rostandi said, "Home." They took him home. He walked into his own homestead on Little Ember at first light 2 days later. He walked past the wall of split oak against the long side of his barn. He walked up the 2 steps of his porch, past the place where 6 starving orcs had slept, and he sat down in his own chair, and he took a very long breath of the wood smoke air of the freight road, and he did not, for a long time, get up. Vrachtul sat on the porch step below him. Kriefta, the youngest, sat on the round of oak in the yard. The other 4 Grokath, at Rostandi's invitation, had gone to work at the sawmill in Hollowreach, where they were the terror of the shift boss and the delight of the ranchers on the lava plain, because they could split wood faster and cleaner than any 6 humans, and would not, for love or money, take a bribe. The overseer's skimmer had, in the days of Rostandi's absence, been dragged behind the barn and covered in tarp. The 3 snake troopers, who had lain face down in the dust with their hands spread, had been given passage off Little Ember in exchange for their word, which was, as it turned out, a word worth keeping, that they would carry a story of what had happened on the yard into every consortium mess and every consortium barracks in the arm of the sky until the story stood in the consortium's own briefing files. And if any consortium overseer with a slate ever again read a lean number over the head of a cooper on a nothing moon, he would think about that story, and he would go down the road. Rostandi sat on his porch, and Vrachtul sat on the step, and the wind came up the switchback and stirred the sawdust in the joints of Vrachtul chest plate. He said, "Blood of broods. Cooper, your sister mother offered you a matriarchy last night before we left. She did. You said no. I did. Why? Because a matriarchy is a chair, because I already have a chair. It is a round of oak in the yard of a cooper on a nothing moon." He looked at her. He said, "That is a hard trade. It is not a trade, it is a debt to me, a debt to a species. My people have carried the consortium's rope for 100 years because we did not know what the humans were. Now I know what the humans are. I would like, if you will have me, to stay on your porch a little while and to learn." He drank his coffee. It was cold. It had been cold since Hollowreach. He did not mind cold coffee. He said, "You are welcome on my porch. There is one thing. Ask Nell, your sister. Nell has a girl. Nell writes me every 3 months on a paper letter that comes on the freight ship out of Kelvin's world. The last letter said the girl is turning 7, and the girl is asking questions about her uncle, and the girl would like, if it can be arranged, to meet the uncle in person before she turns 8. He put the cup on the porch rail. He said, "I am going home. I am going back to Kelvin's world. I am going to see my sister and my niece, and I am going to sit on a porch that is colder than this one, and I am going to be an uncle for the first time in 10 years. Vrachtul said, "The Grokath will guard your homestead until you return. They will not need to. There is no more consortium interest on Little Ember. They will guard it anyway. It is a Grokath house. Grokath houses are guarded." He laughed. It was a shorter laugh than the one in the yard, and there was more of a man in it. He said, "Then guard it." He looked up the freight road, at the black lava plain, at the low red sun sitting on the horizon. He said, "Blood of broods. Yes, when I come back, yes. I will need to teach the girl to split wood in the honor cut of the iron broods. That is a thing she should know." Vrachtul said, "I will teach her myself." They sat on the porch a long time. At the end of it, when the sun had come all the way up and the frost on the woodpile had gone to steam, a low black skimmer came up the switchback from the freight road. It was not a consortium skimmer, it was a matriarchy skimmer. It bore Grekrashlu's own crest. It set down in the yard at the same spot where the overseer's skimmer had set down. Out of it stepped a Grokoth in a diplomat's cloak, and behind her, in a second cloak, stepped Grekrashlu herself, older than she had looked in the throne room and, somehow, smaller, and she stopped at the foot of the porch, and she went down onto both knees the way a Grokoth goes down twice in a lifetime, once to be named and once to swear a blood debt. She said, "Cooper Rostandy of Third Ridge Company, I have come to say the words my daughter of blood said in your yard 6 days ago. I am Grekrashlu of the Iron Broods, matriarch of Vorgrokoth. I owe you the honor of my throne. I will pay the honor by turning the Iron Broods away from the Ophidian Consortium. I will pay it by opening the Sept Limb ports to human trade at no lien and no tariff. I will pay it by putting your name in the Grokoth tally, in the shape of the first human ever named there. I will pay it by putting my seal on a treaty, if you will have me, between the third homeworlds and the Iron Broods, in perpetuity. I will pay it in any way you name. I have come to your porch to ask what shape you would like the payment to take." Rostandy did not stand up. He drank the last of his cold coffee. He looked at Vrachtul Meshach. He looked at Krefta on the round of oak. He looked at Grekrashlu on her knees in the dust of his yard, and at the diplomat behind her, and at the low black matriarchy skimmer parked under his awning of coopered barrels. He said, "Matriarch, yes, thank you. That is a lot of payment for one woodpile." "It is not for the woodpile, I know." He set the cup down. He took a long breath of the wood smoke morning of Little Ember. He said, "Matriarch, I will accept the treaty, I will accept the trade, I will accept my name in your tally. That last one is a small piece of vanity in an old soldier, and I will take it. I would like the treaty drawn up in the human way, on paper, so the girl of my sister can hold it in her hand when she is old enough to read it. That is what I would like." He looked her in the eye. He said, "But, matriarch, I would like it very clear, and I would like it on the paper, that when the treaty is signed, I go back to being a cooper. I fix hoops, I bend oak, I split wood. I do not lead your broods, and I do not sit on any council, and I do not carry any commission of your matriarchy, and I do not, under any terms, put on a uniform again for you or for anyone. You understand me." Grekrashlu said, "I understand. Say it plain. You are a cooper." "Yes." "I have come to your porch. I have found a cooper." "Yes," Rostandy said. "Thank you, matriarch. Very much obliged. But, just so we are clear." He picked up his cold coffee cup. He said, "I do not wash windows." He stood up. He went inside. He shut the door of the homestead on Little Ember behind him, and inside the door he stood a long moment with his forehead against the wood, and he did what he had not let himself do in 10 years, which was to weep for the men and women he had walked down the ridge of Ashfall without. Then he wiped his face on his sleeve. He put a fresh log in the stove. He put on a fresh pot of coffee. And he went to the kitchen table, and he took out a piece of paper, and he wrote a letter to his sister Nell in the small cabin outside a cold city on a colder world, and he told her that he was coming home. Outside on the porch, Vrachtul Meshach of the Iron Broods, exile no longer, drew the terms of the first Grokoth human treaty in the history of the Iron Belt in a fine Grokoth hand, and set her seal on it in wax, and set beside her seal the seal of her sister mother, and set beside those 2 seals a third mark, which was the mark of a splitting maul struck once along the grain in the honor cut of the broods, so that any Grokoth who ever read the treaty in later years would know it had been drawn on the porch of a cooper. At the foot of the porch, Krefta, the youngest, who had ridden with a human across 112 light years and back, and had grown, in the course of a week, from a starving pup into something the ziggurat of Vorgrokoth would one day call a name of its own, put his tusks together in the shape of a Grokoth smile, and picked up the splitting maul from where Rostandy had left it against the porch post 6 days before, and he went behind the barn to split the next round of oak, in the honor cut, at the wall of a barn that had by then become the corner of a house, and under the porch of that cooper for 100 years afterward, no honest hunger of any sentient species was ever again turned away. What a journey! The true weapon in the end was never the axe on the strap or the shield on the yoke, The true weapon was a small, stubborn promise made in a cold cabin that no one who came asking for a bowl of soup would leave a porch in chains. If this story moved you, drop a like. It is what keeps quiet stories about loud men alive in this feed. Share it with someone who also loves the sci-fi of one small human standing against the impossible. And subscribe with the bell on so you do not miss the next epic tale in this human versus the galaxy corner of the sky. And tell me down in the comments, if you had been in Vrachtul Meshek's boots that morning under the porch, would you have stayed on the Cooper's porch as a sister of blood, or would you have gone back to the throne of Vorgrokath to claim the matriarchy you were owed? Only one answer, in one sentence, in the comments. Keep looking up at the stars, the ones the humans of the third homeworlds are still standing under, and refusing, always, to fall.